call. This is Lee Cullom with Northcraft Analytics. We have John Cullom and Chris Yates on the call from the team as well today. First, a brief introduction of John, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So prior to becoming CTO and CEO of Northcraft Analytics, John spent a considerable amount of time in finance operations and consulting with American Airlines, Ernst & Young, and Seabury Group. After completing his MBA at Cornell University on a full scholarship, he launched his first BI software company. In 2008, John and I joined forces to start Northcraft Analytics to bring that same concept to IT departments. So briefly on Northcraft, we were recognized in 2014, 15, and 16 as a leading provider of infrastructure and operations dashboards. We provide BI applications for enterprise IT departments with clients ranging from $4 billion in revenue to $440 billion. So our solutions are designed for the enterprise IT department. Today we're going to be talking about how to measure IT governance, and this is an issue we've seen in large IT organizations, particularly with respect to the definition of risk of IT infrastructure. So for those of you who have invested heavily in a CMDB, IT governance organization, and have an understanding of some of the different governance frameworks such as COBIT, it can be a little frustrating that you spent that much time and effort and money and there's still more to be done. Today we're going to discuss how to have a CMDB that is respected by operations, and we're really talking about the COO, not only the VP of IT operations. So we will have questions at the end, okay? So we're going to be storing those up, but you can feel free to ask those at any time throughout the webinar. And with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. So I'm going to turn it over to John Cullom.
Okay, great. Thanks, Lee. I appreciate the introduction. Everybody, I really appreciate your time and your attention attending this IT governance presentation. We're pretty proud of the work we've done on this, so we're happy to share it. Everybody out there that's gone through the CMDB effort understands how difficult it is to collect data and then where the data is a gap. And you're also pretty well aware that those gaps in data pose a real risk to the organization. Having the wrong picture or an inadequate picture of your infrastructure is like driving with your eyes closed. And we've all seen where within the organization, the information gathering isn't one of the priorities of management. The data population rates, even if those efforts are going forward, aren't closely monitored. And we definitely experience that the risks of inadequate data aren't mapped to the organizational risks, so there's a lack of understanding. And the interactions among different risk components are certainly poorly understood. From an operational point of view, that makes sense. There's another risk involved, and that's really organizationally. And a lot of this in IT operations, you'll see that IT has not been effective communicating its value to executives, especially around the CMDB, which is expensive, it's investment heavy, but a lot of times the value isn't recognized at the executive level. Even when this IT asset management function and the CMDB efforts have what is a big success at the operational level, a lot of the times at the executive level, you get a sort of a who cares at the top. And it's really because we're not speaking the same language. When we're in that case, further investments in the CMDB are threatened. And with the lack of an executive sponsor, a lot of times you'll find that it's hard to attract and keep good internal candidates. And that can be a long-term threat to the organization as a whole. So what we're going to address in this presentation is how to get to, although none of us are actually in the chaotic phase, how to get you to this paradise here. The chaotic phase really exists when there's no governance, risk management, or compliance function in the organization. I don't think anybody is really there. And if you are, you have bigger problems than what we're addressing today. But when that function doesn't exist in an organization, the organization as a whole faces strategic risk and doesn't identify its existential risks. That's a pretty bad situation. The next level down, and I doubt that there are many on this call that are in this situation, but if you are, this presentation can give you some of the business justifications for investing in the CMDB. But when you're in a state of no CMDB, you face extended line of business outages. You don't really know how to invest in capacity. Incident resolution can be extended. I would say that most of us are probably in these next two phases, which is we either have a very young CMDB where it's a list of critical assets and some important information around them, or we have a fully functional CMDB. In that case, we're getting some of the benefits of the CMDB. The data is populated, you have good relationships with applications, you even have the beginnings of a service view, but you still hear a lot of complaints from asset managers. Oh, the CMDB is not completely populated, the data is unreliable, I can't make decisions with it. Even when that may or may not be the case, you may have a 99% functional CMDB and you'll still hear those kind of complaints. And the reason really isn't data quality, the reason is that people don't see the operational use of the CMDB. So we're talking about moving from this level of a functional CMDB to a CMDB that's respected by operations. And in this case, you're finding that 90% of the time the CMDB is involved in change impact analysis. You're allocating asset values to line of business departments. It's key to disaster recovery. This operationally is where you want to be, but even at this level of maturity, if it's not understood at the executive level, you still face the danger of underinvestment and the lack of attention that can make it hard to recruit good people. To get a CMDB that's respected by executives, we need to begin speaking in the same language as the executives, where the CMDB is seen to and does reduce organizational risk and enable strategic capabilities that will help the organization win in the marketplace. So I want to talk a little bit about the method that we're going to go through in order to get there. There are two tasks that are done at the beginning of this initiative and then a continuous improvement process. The first is to obtain an understanding of organizational risks. The next is to take an internal look at the assets within the IT department and prioritize them by the level of risk contained. Then we enter the continuous improvement process where we select a target asset class. We create an operational risk register for that asset class. We identify the critical attributes that are necessary to manage risk. And then we map those operational risks that we've identified for that asset class to the organizational risks that executives care about. And then we establish a report and review process to communicate the actions that have gone forward. So we're going to start with obtaining the organizational risk registry. The organizational risk registry is the output of a strategic management process whereby the major risks that are faced by the organization have been identified. The good news about this is this already exists in your company. It's not IT's job to produce the strategic level document. So my recommendation is to leverage what already exists. The bad news about this is that's probably not a line of communication that IT already has open to it. You will have had some communications with your governance or risk management department, probably in producing evidence for compliance officers or as the result of an audit. So there might be light contact. This is really developing a partnership with that group in order to, one, get a document like this, or at least an understanding of the kind of risk that the organization is worried about at a strategic level. Again, I believe that this should be the output of the strategic planning process, but and not something that you should just get out of a template. However, that being said, we have templates available. This is an example from a financial organization, but it's fairly generic, but what you'll find is that these types of strategic risks are really specific to your organization, and it's worth having something that's tailor fit there. The next step is to look internally and prioritize the asset classes by risk. Now, this isn't a scientific process. This is something that can be done pretty intuitively, but I think everybody here would recognize the truth that 80% of the risk within the organization is contained within 20% of the assets. We mostly know where to start, but this will serve as the roadmap for the continuous improvement process that we set up to manage risk. This is sort of a typical hierarchy, but it might differ for your organization as well. So now we've entered the continuous improvement process. Our first step is to select a target asset class, and that will just be the asset class that contains the greatest amount of unmapped risk. All of our efforts, once we've sort of selected that class, will be done in the context of that class. The reason that we're doing this in sort of this iterative manner is otherwise we find ourselves in a boil the ocean scenario and just really trying to bite off more than we can chew. Asset class by asset class, this method will allow us to produce big wins pretty quickly and in pretty manageable projects. In this case, for our example, we'll target servers. The next step is creating an operational risk registry. This is in the context of an asset class, so hey, here's servers, to catalog all of the risks that are involved with that asset class. This is really just formalizing something that you do every day in your job. If you're in asset management, you know the reasons that you're gathering this data. This is really getting this down on paper, right? So when we're grabbing something like our locations, we know that we're doing it for inventory and that we're going to use it to allocate asset values. And this is really to get those risks out on the table. And in this case, the definition of a risk is really a tangible negative consequence that can be expected through operations surrounding this asset class. So it's a pretty straightforward process. These are the kind of things that you're either concerned about work and you can put them aside, or they keep you up all night. The next step, and this is sort of in conjunction with the previous one, is to identify the critical assets, or to identify the critical attributes that are necessary to manage or mitigate these risks. So what kind of information would I need to gather to address these negative consequences? That seems pretty straightforward. The key finding, though, that we found at our clients is that this cannot be done in a vacuum. It's sort of pointless. As a thought exercise, it's important to come up with your wish list and say, this is all the information I would like to have. But the key to success here is to work with the asset owners and the people that are responsible for populating this information to come to an agreement with them that they will in fact support what's going on. Having developed the risk registry as the first step helps in that process. So to say that I need to have a valid cost center for each one of these assets in order to allocate asset values, people know why they're doing what they're doing, and they understand why that accountability will be positive for them as well. Okay, so the next step is really what is the novel bit, which is mapping operational risk to these data inadequacies. So the first step, and this was kind of done as we're coming up with the risk registry and the critical attributes, is we know why we're doing them. So if we're gathering cost center, we know that that's in order to allocate asset values, to mitigate the risk of asset value being unallocated and sitting in the IT department. If we're gathering IP address, we can suppose that that might impact disaster recovery, or it might impact the an automated patch release or an automated release at a certain percentage level. So having gone through that process, we have probably, in credibility-wise, gone a fair bit towards moving the CMDB from functional to respected by operations. It isn't the end goal, but it's sort of the first step along the path. So the next step, and this helps us move the next step up the ladder, is to map these data inadequacy risks to the organizational risks. So we can see if we had a known security flaw unaddressed, that could financially impact one or more clients. And we understand now at the operational level, we have the executive's attention. If we're going to have a client-facing event, that's pretty much going to get any C-level executive understanding what it is that IT does. And this really, it's not a very difficult process to do this. This is just really more of a translation. So I'd like to take a little bit of time to go through a single example so we can see the path as a whole. So in this example, we have a server and we have a maintenance window, and we're suggesting for that server that the maintenance window is left undefined for that server. So we're going to determine if that has any risks at an operational level. We're suggesting here that that can pose a risk to an automated patch. Perhaps that patch is scheduled during a period where the maintenance window is up and that server is not allowed to receive that patch. That can lead to a known security flaw being unaddressed, which can expose client data to an external actor, which we can understand might lead to an organizational risk where financial impact may happen to multiple clients, which could lead to enduring reputational impact for the organization. So we can see pretty clearly here, data inadequacies can be mapped straight through to some very high level sorts of risks that will get executive attention. So the next process is really, once we have these mappings done, it's possible to measure these and report and review on these. I want to take a little bit of time right now to demonstrate some of the reporting that can be done around that. Here we have sort of an overview dashboard measuring different types of risk to the organization. For instance, percentage of CIs failing disaster recovery, CIs at risk of failing compliance requirements, asset values unallocated, CIs invisible to change impact analysis. These are the kind of things that will at least get operational attention and will probably get executive attention as well. That being sort of a high-level dashboard, we can also drill down into, in this case, CIs at risk of failing disaster recovery. This is a more actionable level, but it also is built to have the executives understand these are applications that face going offline in the case of a disaster. Over time, these things change. If I also want to see, if I want to slice and dice, all of these things are interactive. So I can slice and dice and see how all these things go. But what you're basically coming to understand is, what you're coming to understand is the risk that your organization faces and then your ability to communicate it up to executives, which can be a very powerful presentation, not just from a reporting sense, but also in board level decision-making sense. So once we've conducted that process for one asset class, we re-enter the continuous improvement process and wash, rinse, and repeat, right? So we make the decision, Do we target the next asset class, or should we target more attributes for, a previous asset class? It really is, where can we identify the most risk, and what's going to be the most valuable investment of resources. So once we've gone through that, we actually find ourselves in this state where we walk from having either a young CMDB or a functional CMDB to one that's respected by operations and respected by executives. And in this case, we're able to get a CMDB that reduces organizational risks, it enables strategic capabilities, and we find the executives value CMDB investments as strategic, so you're likely to get the money that you need to continue to make this better. And when the CMDB champions are promoted, which is likely to happen, it's much easier to get good people into that management process and continue to have small and big victories within the asset management process, which is what we all know that this is valuable, and this is the way to continue success. And that is the presentation. We have some time left, so if there are any questions, I would love to have the opportunity to respond.
All right, thanks, John. I'm going to turn it over to Chris Yates. I believe he's got access to the questions from the attendees. Appreciate y'all joining. Chris, what have you got for us?
Thanks, Lee. Yeah, we have a few really good questions. I've picked a few here, and if we have time towards the end, we'll try to get to everything. But we'll go ahead and start off with, should the risk registry be stored in my ITSM system, or are you talking about a process, or both? Where does this data live? If that makes sense, John.
So, yeah, no, that's a good question. So there are a couple ways to approach this. The first, and my default position is that Northcraft provides both a standalone application and a set of modifications to ServiceNow that can store these risk mappings and attribute to risk mappings. But another place where this can live pretty easily is within the CMDB itself, with some pretty either light modifications or reuse of existing structures. You can create risk as an asset class or as a CMDB class, and do the relationship mapping within the CMDB. I know that Remedy supports that pretty well, and ServiceNow with additional of a field or two can support that as well. So that's a pretty natural place to put this. But this is also the risk mapping process. It is a new process, and it is a new business process.
Okay, that's a good question. So we'll go on to the next one. We had a gentleman ask, do you have a list of controls and risks that we can use in our project?
So yes, I think we have templates both for organizational risk and operational risks. The operational risks, the template I think is pretty useful in that those risks are similar organization to organization, and the IT infrastructure is similar organization to organization. The organizational risks are less so. So again, that should be an output from your strategic planning process. The organizational risk will be specific to your organization. We have some high-level templates. They're more generic and probably less useful, but they can be used to sort of get you started. So, but no, that's a good question.
Okay, great. We'll go on to the next one. Someone asked, do you have an example of a specific risk that you've defined? What would this be done by a CI, an asset, a business service, or a technical service?
Okay, so that's a good question. What I was trying to show previously, this is probably the most specific risk, but I think maybe it was not clear that how exactly this works. Right, so this for each individual CI, in this case a server, there's a score related to the maintenance window, whether that information is populated. These relationships would apply, are inherited to everything in that asset class. So this chain of risk would be valid for any server. It's just whether that risk is incurred has to do with how that data is populated. If you have maintenance window populated, you're unlikely to face this risk. If it's not, you're sort of in the firing line.
Okay. And another question, we have already defined and populated the CMDB with the attributes you've mentioned, like IP address. And they ask, so what is this?
Okay, so that's, so the good news is you've done most of the hard work, right? So populating the CMDB, getting good information in it, that is by far the largest effort. What this is taking that effort and exposing the value of it to executives. So say I have the IP address and the maintenance windows defined for all my servers. It's very easy for the executive to say, who cares about that? What is not easy for them to ignore is that you've reduced the risk of, say you've reduced the risk of exposing client data by 99% over the past 6 months. You know, that will allow you to claim a victory, or it will get the attention that you need in order to obtain further investment. So this is largely a translation process.
Excellent. Okay, last one I have. What is involved with implementing this methodology? Do I need a tool? Is it services?
So that's a good question. I can give you the Northcraft answer for this. This methodology would be found with or without us. And again, we've sort of discussed how this can live in your CMDB. That is a general structure. But that being said, the Northcraft answer is we have a practice around risk mapping and governance. It's basically a pilot project to get you started. So we take your process owners and we walk them through one asset class, provide the templates and get you the mappings and work through the mapping case to your organizational risk registry. And once we do that for one asset class, the service owners are trained and have the work products that they need to continue the continuous improvement process, for the life of the CMDB. There will always be data gathering projects, and this is the way to justify them and make business cases, and then communicate the success of those processes. So I'm certain that Lee or Chris would be happy to speak with you about how to engage in a project like that. But I think that it would take that shape even if you were to conduct that internally.
Certainly. Well, that's all the questions I have. I think we're running a little short on time. Lee, do you want to take us out?
Yep. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending today. And we look forward to our next quarterly webinar, which should come around right a little bit before, probably in between Thanksgiving and Christmas. Look out for that in email, and we will send a recorded copy of this out to all of you. Thanks again, everyone, for attending.